The great conclave shimmered, a vast, circular chamber carved from the heart of a neutron star, its walls a cascade of captured light and solidified time. Gravity itself was a political statement here, tailored to the precise biological needs of each of the assembled delegates, a constant, silent reminder of their disparate origins and the fragile unity they professed. At the center of it all, a swirling vortex of holographic data cast ethereal light upon the faces of beings who had guided the course of the galaxy for eons uncounted. There was the venerable Kalen, his form a crystalline lattice that pulsed with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a mind that had witnessed the birth of stars. Opposite him sat the Prime Ascendancy's warlord, Xylo, his carapace of polished obsidian absorbing all light, his posture a study in coiled, predatory stillness. Others filled the spaces between them. The psionic nexuses of Cygnus X1, the gaseous philosophers of the Helix Nebula, the silicon-based cartographers from the galactic core, a menagerie of life's most successful and enduring experiments. But today, their ancient power was a shroud for an even more ancient fear. The vortex at the chamber's heart displayed a single, impossibly solitary star system. It was a pariah, a wound in the galactic map, a place spoken of only in hushed archives and cautionary tales. The Sol system, and from its third planet a world designated Terra, a world that should have been nothing but dust and radioactive glass. A signal was emanating. It was not a chaotic burst of residual energy, nor the random noise of a dying celestial body. It was structured. It was coherent. It was, by all measures of galactic science, impossible, a whisper from a corpse. The silence in the conclave was heavier than any star, a crushing weight of shared history and a single monumental act of judgment that had haunted them for 500,000 years. It was Kalen, the Venerable, who finally fractured the stillness, his voice not a sound but a series of harmonic chimes that resonated directly within the minds of all present. 500,000 standard years, the chimes sang, a melody of sorrow and disbelief. We passed judgment. We enacted the Terran mandate. We cauterized a potential infection before it could spread. We declared the system cleansed, the species expunged, their chaotic potential nullified for the good of all. He paused, the crystalline facets of his body shifting, refracting the holographic light into 1,000 fractured images of the dead world. And yet, here we are, listening to a ghost. Xylo of the Prime Ascendancy shifted, a sound like tectonic plates grinding against one another. His voice was a low-frequency rumble that vibrated through the chamber's deck. A ghost, Venerable, or an echo, a technological remnant, nothing more, a final, pathetic cry from a species that burned too brightly and too quickly. They were deemed unstable. Their biology was a paradox of savage aggression and illogical altruism. Their expansion was like a wildfire, consuming resources with no thought for the galactic balance. We did what was necessary. The certainty in his voice was a shield, but even he could not entirely mask the undercurrent of unease. The mandate had been the Ascendancy's proudest moment, the ultimate enforcement of galactic stability. To question it was to question the very foundation of their power. A new voice, fluid and synthesized, emerged from a roiling cloud of sentient nanites representing the technocracy of Kepler 186f. The signal's complexity belies that assessment, Warlord Xylo. Its quantum encryption is of a nature our most advanced algorithms cannot penetrate. It is not an echo. It is a live transmission. It is structured with a mathematical elegance that suggests a mind, or minds, of profound sophistication. The energy signature alone is a violation of the second law of thermodynamics as we understand it. It is drawing power from a source we cannot identify, seemingly from vacuum energy itself. This is not the work of a dying remnant. The debate rippled through the conclave, a tapestry of fear, arrogance, and intellectual curiosity. They replayed the old archives, holographic images of the pre-mandate humans flickering in the chamber's center. They saw primitive spacecraft, crude kinetic weapons, and a dizzying array of cultures clashing and coalescing on their single, turbulent world. The records portrayed them as a species on the cusp of interstellar travel, but consumed by internal conflict, their technological ascent wildly outpacing their social and philosophical development. They were, by the conclave's cold logic, a statistical certainty for galactic disruption. A species that would inevitably bring its own chaos to the stars, upsetting the meticulously balanced ecosystem of civilizations that had existed for millions of years. Kalen remembered the final debate, a lifetime ago even for one as long-lived as he. He had argued for observation, for a period of extended quarantine to see if the species could overcome its own nature. But the prime ascendancy, backed by other, more cautious factions, had pushed for preemption. The risk was too great, they had argued. A single spark could ignite a galactic war, and so a fleet of unimaginable power had been dispatched. It had not been a war, it had been an extermination, precise and absolute. A wave of deatomizing energy had washed over the third planet, silencing it in a microsecond. It was the Conclave's greatest secret and its deepest shame. An act of galactic gardening, they had called it, pruning a weed before it could choke the life from the garden. "We must consider the possibility," Kalen chimed, his thoughts cutting through the rising tide of speculation, "that our assessment was flawed, that our understanding of this species of humanity was incomplete. We saw only chaos. Perhaps there was a pattern we failed to perceive." Xylos scoffed, a grating sound of chitin on metal. "A pattern of self-destruction. Their own records, which we so carefully preserved, are a testament to their violent nature. They warred with one another over ideology, over resources, over lines drawn in the dirt of their own world. To suggest they possessed some hidden depth is to indulge in sentimentality, venerable, a dangerous luxury." "And yet," countered the technocracy's swirling cloud, "the signal persists. It is not aggressive, it is not a challenge or a threat. It is an invitation. The core of the message, beneath the layers of impenetrable encryption, is a repeating sequence of prime numbers, a universal constant. It is the classic greeting of a species seeking intelligent discourse." The implications of that statement settled over the assembly. An invitation from a tomb, a greeting from a species they had erased from existence. It was a philosophical and existential crisis of the highest order. If a remnant had survived, how had they done so? How had they remained hidden for 500,000 years? And what form had their evolution taken in that unimaginable span of time, festering in the darkness of their ruined system? Had they nurtured a hatred that had simmered for 5,000 centuries? Or had they achieved something else entirely, something beyond the Conclave's comprehension? The debate raged for what would have been days in human terms. Factions formed and dissolved. The militarists, led by Xylo, argued for a fleet to be sent immediately, to silence the signal permanently this time, to correct the failure of the original mandate. The diplomats and scientists, led by Kalen, urged caution. To respond with aggression would be to prove the very barbarism they had once accused humanity of. It would be an admission that, even after all this time, the Conclave had not evolved beyond the crude calculus of fear. Ultimately, it was the sheer impossibility of the signal that tipped the scales. The mystery was too profound, the technological implications too significant to ignore. The potential to learn or the potential to be undone was a gravity well from which none of them could escape. A compromise was reached, a decision that satisfied no one completely but allowed the Conclave to move forward. They would not send a fleet. They would not ignore the signal. They would send a single vessel. One ship, the most advanced exploratory cruiser in the combined fleets, crewed by a diverse assembly of specialists from every major faction. It would be a vessel of science and diplomacy, but it would be shielded and armed with the power to vaporize a moon should diplomacy fail. Its name was the Stellaran, the Starseeker, and its mission was to travel to the forbidden heart of the Sol system, to approach the silent, watching world of Earth, and to find the source of the impossible whisper. As the Conclave dissolved, the holographic vortex shrinking back into the singularity at its core, Kalen remained, his crystalline form reflecting the now empty chamber. He felt the weight of history pressing down on him, the echoes of that ancient, terrible decision. They had acted out of a belief in order, in the preservation of a peaceful galactic tapestry. They had judged an entire species based on a snapshot of its turbulent adolescence. Now, after 500,000 years of silence, they were being forced to look at the page they had so violently torn from the Book of Life, only to find that someone or something had written a new chapter in its place. The Stellaran would not just be seeking the source of a signal, it would be seeking a reckoning with its own past, a confrontation with the ghost of a species they had killed, only to find it might be more alive than they could have ever imagined. The silence of the void awaited, but for the first time in millennia it did not feel empty. It felt watchful. The journey of the Stellaran was a silent, reverent passage through the vast, star-dusted tapestries of the galaxy. It slipped through nebulae that glowed with the ghosts of creation and past star fleets that slept in the cold graveyards of forgotten wars. On board, a fragile coalition of beings worked in quiet, focused tension. The ship was commanded by a triumvirate, a prime ascendancy strategist for security, a technocracy analyst for science, and a venerable philosopher, a student of Kalen's named Lyra, for diplomacy and first contact. Lyra's form was smaller and more intricate than Kalen's, a delicate lattice of light and crystal that seemed to hum with a constant, low-level psionic energy. She spent most of the voyage in meditation, sifting through the archived records of humanity, trying to understand the spirit of a people from the cold, dead data of their extinction. She saw their art, a chaotic explosion of color and form, filled with expressions of profound love and terrifying rage. She listened to their music, a symphony of mathematical precision and raw, untamed emotion that seemed to defy the very logic of sound waves. She read their philosophies, 1,000 different arguments about the meaning of existence, each one pursued with a fervent, almost desperate passion. The conclave had seen only their wars and their divisions. Lyra began to see a species defined by its paradoxes, fragile yet resilient, cruel yet capable of immense compassion, logical yet driven by inscrutable passions. They were not a monolith. They were a storm of conflicting ideas, a dynamic, evolving consciousness that the conclave, in its rigid adherence to order, had been utterly incapable of understanding. The mandate, she realized with a growing sense of dread, had not been an act of gardening. It had been an act of intellectual cowardice, a fear of the unknown. As they entered the outer marker of the Sol system, a palpable change occurred in the ship's atmosphere. The very fabric of spacetime felt different here, thinner, as if stretched taut over a great and terrible memory. The star, Sol, burned with a steady, indifferent light, a silent witness to the crime that had been committed in its orbit. The outer planets, gas giants of majestic size and scope, drifted in their silent paths, their faces unscarred. But as the Stellaran moved inward, past the orbit of a great red world, the scars of the past became visible. Asteroid fields that were not natural, their orbits chaotic and their composition disturbingly uniform, the shattered remains of human-made satellites and stations. And then there was Earth. It hung in the void like a sapphire that had been scorched and broken. The deep blues of its oceans were still there, but they were dull, lifeless. The greens of its continents were gone, replaced by vast, continent-spanning deserts of gray and brown. From orbit, the planet was a testament to the awesome, terrible power of the conclave, a world silenced. Scars from the cleansing beam were visible even from this distance, great, glassy plains where entire mountain ranges had been vaporized. It was a tomb world, a monument to fear. Yet the signal was stronger here than ever, a clear, piercing note in the oppressive silence. The technocracy analyst, a being of pure data flowing through the ship's crystal core computers, traced the signal's origin with unnerving precision. It was not coming from the surface, not from any of the ruined cities or glass deserts. It was emanating from deep beneath the northern polar ice cap, a location that should have been geologically stable and unremarkable. The Stellaran descended, its advanced stealth systems rendering it invisible to any conventional sensor, a ghost ship visiting a ghost world. It hovered over the vast, white expanse of the pole, a landscape of eternal ice and wind. The signal originates from a point approximately 3 kilometers beneath the ice, the analyst reported, its synthesized voice devoid of emotion, yet the data it presented was staggering. Scans show an anomaly, a structure. It is of impossible size and its energy signature is quiescent. It is not shielded in any conventional sense. It seems to be integrated into the planet's own geomagnetic field, using it as a natural cloak. The material composition is unknown, a form of crystalline carbon bonded at a quantum level. It is ancient. The ice layers above it are undisturbed for at least 500,000 years. Lyra watched the imaging data form on the main holographic display. It was a vast, geometric shape, a snowflake of impossible complexity buried in the ice. It was not a city, not a military base. It looked more like a seed or a tomb. A deep, instinctual fear and emotion her people had long since mastered prickled at the edges of her consciousness. They had come expecting to find a desperate remnant, a handful of survivors clinging to life in a bunker. This was something else entirely. This was the work of a civilization that had not been surprised, a civilization that had prepared. Following the conclave's directive, they made no move to drill or excavate. They sent a single, tight-beam transmission, a simple message encoded in the universal language of prime numbers, the same greeting the signal had been sending them. "We are the Galactic Conclave. We have come in peace. We wish to understand." For a long moment that stretched into an eternity, there was no reply. The signal from below continued its steady, patient pulse unchanged. The Prime Ascendancy commander began to grow agitated, his claws tapping rhythmically on his command console. "It is a trick," he rumbled. "An automated system. The inhabitants are long dead, and this is just the final, meaningless echo of their passing." But Lyra felt something, a subtle shift in the psionic background noise of the universe, a sense of being observed, not by a machine but by a mind, a vast, patient, and impossibly old consciousness. And then the signal from below ceased. The piercing note that had drawn them across the galaxy was gone. The silence that replaced it was somehow more profound, more unnerving than the signal itself, and on the main view screen a new light appeared. A single point of soft, white light that rose from the ice below, not as a projectile or a ship, but as if the light itself was simply choosing to exist in that space. It drifted up towards the Stellaran, effortless and silent. The light resolved itself into an image, a hard light projection of a single androgynous figure. It was humanoid, a perfect echo of the beings from the archives, but it was also something more. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were a solid, deep silver, devoid of pupils, but radiating an intelligence that was both ancient and intensely present. The figure was clad in simple, seamless white robes that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. It was utterly calm, its expression one of serene, detached curiosity. It spoke. The voice was not a sound transmitted through the void, but a direct, telepathic impression, a perfect translation of thought into a form each member of the crew could understand in their own native tongue. The language was the Conclave's own formal diplomatic speech, spoken with a flawless, unaccented purity that no non-native speaker should have been able to achieve. "Greetings," the voice said, a melody of pure reason and gentle inquiry. "I am the archivist. We have been waiting for you." The bridge of the Stellaran was frozen in a state of collective shock. Lyra was the first to recover, her crystalline form pulsing with a soft, conciliatory light. "You have been waiting. You knew we were coming." "Not you specifically," the archivist replied, its silver eyes seeming to look past the ship's hull and directly into each of their minds. "But we knew that someone would come eventually. Consciousness is, by its nature, curious. The signal was a key, left in a lock for anyone with the wisdom to turn it rather than break the door. It has been broadcasting for 500 of your years. You are the first to arrive." The Prime Ascendancy commander stepped forward, his voice a low growl of suspicion. "Who are you? What is this place? Are you the last of your kind?" The archivist's expression did not change, but an almost imperceptible sense of melancholy flowed from its thoughts. "We are humanity, or rather, we are the seeds of what humanity chose to become. This place is the Ark, and we are not the last. We are the first." The great reveal came not as a boast or a threat, but as a quiet, somber lesson in galactic history, delivered by the archivist with the detached precision of a scholar. The Ark, it explained, was not a bunker built in haste to survive the Conclave's attack. It was a project that had been in development for generations before the Judgment Fleet ever arrived. Humanity's astronomers, clumsy and primitive as they were by galactic standards, had detected something the Conclave, in its infinite wisdom, had missed. A hypervelocity gamma-ray burst, originating from a collapsing magnetar in a nearby dwarf galaxy, was on a direct intercept course with their solar system. It was an extinction-level event of cosmic proportions, utterly unstoppable with their level of technology. Their frantic expansion into their solar system, the chaos the Conclave had so feared, was not a prelude to galactic conquest. It was a desperate, panicked search for a solution, an attempt to build off-world colonies or ships that could outrun the coming storm. They had tried to send messages, to cry for help to the silent stars, but their primitive radio waves had been lost in the cosmic noise, dismissed as the babbling of an infant species. The Conclave had seen aggression where there was only desperation. They had misinterpreted a scream for help as a war cry. "You did not destroy our species," the archivist explained, the thought resonating with a profound, aching sadness. "You merely changed the course of our survival. Your arrival was fortuitous. The energy of your cleansing beam was immense, far greater than anything we could have produced. We did not try to stop it. We harnessed it. It provided the final, necessary power to activate the Ark's long-term stasis fields and complete the final deep Earth excavation, sealing us from the universe just moments before the gamma-ray burst sterilized this entire sector of space." The truth was a physical blow to the crew of the Stellaran. They were not destroyers. They were unwitting saviors. They had not committed genocide. They had, through a horrific act of violence, provided the very means for humanity's survival, sheltering them from a cosmic storm that would have erased them completely. The Conclave's greatest crime was not malice, but a profound and arrogant ignorance. The archivist then showed them the Ark. It was not a city, it was a world unto itself. Vast simulated realities spun out in computational matrices of impossible complexity. For 500,000 years, humanity had not just slept. They had lived. They had grown. Generations had been born, had lived full lives, and had died within these simulated worlds, their consciousnesses contributing to a constantly evolving collective. They had shed the instabilities of their early biology, the tribalism and aggression that had so alarmed the Conclave, not through genetic engineering, but through 500,000 years of focused philosophical and psychological evolution. They had become a species of pure mind, their physical forms preserved in cryogenic stasis, but their consciousnesses free to explore the infinite landscapes of thought. They had mastered sciences the Conclave was only beginning to theorize about. They had explored the very nature of consciousness itself. They had created art of such sublime complexity that it would take a venerable 1,000 years to fully appreciate a single piece. They had not been stewing in a desire for revenge. They had been waiting for the galaxy to become a place they could have a meaningful conversation with. "We hold no anger towards the Conclave," the archivist stated, its silver eyes seeming to hold the weight of all the centuries of its people's quiet existence. "Your actions were born of fear, and fear is the legacy of incomplete data. We have spent our long isolation studying the galaxy through the signals you so carelessly broadcast across the void. We have learned your languages, your histories, your philosophies. We understand your fear of chaos. It is a fear we, too, had to overcome. Now we are awake. The Ark's purpose is fulfilled. We are ready to begin a new conversation." Lyra, her crystalline mind reeling from the sheer scale of the revelation, could only form a single question, a thought that felt small and insignificant in the face of such history. "What do you want?" The archivist offered the first hint of what might be a smile, a subtle shift in its serene features. "To learn, to share, to exist. We have been alone in our own minds for a very long time. We would like to see the stars again, not as conquerors as you once feared, but as fellow travelers. The universe is a vast and complex place. It is too large to be understood from a single point of view. We offer you ours." The Stellaran remained in orbit of the dead Earth for a week, a period of intense, reality-altering communication. The archivist, a single terminal for a collective consciousness of billions, downloaded a sliver of their knowledge into the ship's computers, data on physics, biology, and cosmology that would take the technocracy's greatest minds a century to fully comprehend. But it was not the science that was the most profound gift. It was their philosophy. A philosophy of radical empathy, of understanding born from 500,000 years of introspection. They were not vengeful gods, but calm, logical, and deeply ethical beings who had used their long isolation to achieve a level of wisdom that made even the venerable seem young and impulsive. When the Stellaran finally turned to leave, its mission complete, the solar system felt different. It was no longer a graveyard. It was a cradle that had nurtured a new form of life, a form of life that the galaxy, in its arrogance, had tried to abort. As Lyra took one last look at the blue and brown marble, she knew that the report they were about to deliver to the Conclave would not just change galactic policy. It would shatter the very foundations of their understanding of life, intelligence, and their own place in the cosmos. The ghost they had come to investigate was real, and it was about to teach the galaxy the true meaning of being human. The return of the Stellaran to the Conclave was an event of unprecedented gravity. The great chamber was filled to capacity, the air thick with a tension that was 1,000 times greater than when the ship had departed. The preliminary report had already been sent. A compressed data stream that had sent shockwaves through the political and scientific foundations of every civilization in the compact. Now, the crew was to give their full testimony. Lyra stood at the center of the chamber, her crystalline form seeming to absorb the weight of every gaze. Beside her, the Prime Ascendancy Commander stood stiff and silent, his usual arrogance replaced by a somber, shell-shocked humility. Lyra's testimony was not a report. It was a story of a monumental 500,000-year-old mistake. She spoke of the Ark, of the simulated worlds, of a civilization that had turned inward to achieve a level of enlightenment the Conclave could only dream of. She relayed the archivist's quiet, devastating explanation of the gamma-ray burst, of humanity's desperate, misunderstood plea for help. She did not use accusatory tones. She simply presented the facts, allowing the truth to land with its own crushing weight. The chamber was silent, the kind of silence that follows a revelation so profound it leaves no room for words. When she finished, it was Xylo, the unyielding warlord of the Prime Ascendancy, who broke the stillness. He stepped forward, his massive form seeming diminished in the vast chamber. He did not look at Lyra, but at the holographic image of Earth that now floated, serene and watchful, in the center of the room. "We were wrong," he rumbled, the admission costing him more than any lost battle. "Our fear blinded us. We saw a reflection of our own potential for violence and called it humanity. We committed an act of supreme arrogance. We did not prune a weed. We trampled a flower we did not have the wisdom to recognize." His words, coming from the leader of the most militaristic and prideful faction, shattered the last vestiges of denial. A wave of shame and contrition washed through the conclave. Kalen, the ancient and venerable, pulsed with a deep, sorrowful blue light. "The Terran Mandate is the greatest stain upon the history of this conclave," his chimes sang, a funereal dirge. "An error of such magnitude that it calls into question our very right to guide the destiny of this galaxy." But the humans, through Lyra, had not asked for an apology. They had not demanded reparations or revenge. They had asked for a conversation. They had offered to share their knowledge, their unique perspective born of their long, lonely journey. The debate that followed was not about guilt, but about the future. Could they, should they, accept this offer? To do so would be to admit their fallibility on a scale never before imagined. It would mean restructuring their entire political and philosophical landscape. It was in the midst of this debate that the second, and far greater, phase of the human reveal began. A new communication opened from the Sol system, a direct transmission from the Ark to the conclave chamber itself. The holographic image of Earth dissolved and was replaced by the serene, silver-eyed face of the archivist. Its presence, even as a projection, filled the chamber with an aura of immense, quiet authority. "We have been monitoring your deliberations," the archivist's telepathic voice filled their minds. "We understand your hesitation. Trust once broken is not easily repaired. You require proof of our intentions, proof that we have evolved beyond the chaos you once feared." The archivist then opened a channel, not to the conclave, but to the galaxy itself. It bypassed all of the conclave's encrypted networks and secure channels with contemptuous ease, broadcasting a single, complex data package to every major populated world simultaneously. It was not a weapon. It was a gift. A complete, unified theory of physics that solved the paradoxes of dark matter and dark energy, a working model for controlled singularity generation, and the mathematical blueprint for instantaneous, non-local travel. It was the key to unlocking the universe, a technological leap of 1,000,000 years, given freely and without condition. And then came the cultural data. Art, music, and philosophies of such breathtaking beauty and depth that they sparked spontaneous, galaxy-wide movements of artistic and spiritual renaissance. The Prime Ascendancy's harsh, martial anthems were suddenly infused with melodies of profound emotional complexity. The Silicon cartographers began to map not just stars, but the landscapes of dreams and ideas. The gift was so immense, so transformative, that it transcended politics. It was an act of profound, radical generosity, the ultimate proof that this new humanity was not a threat, but a source of potential enlightenment for all. The conclave was humbled into silence. The gesture was unanswerable. They had offered humanity death, and humanity, in return, had offered them the stars. A new resolution was passed, not a treaty or an alliance, but an invitation to converse. It was the beginning of a new era, a slow, cautious integration of two profoundly different forms of wisdom, the conclave's ancient, galaxy-spanning experience, and humanity's deep, introspective, and hyper-evolved understanding of consciousness. Human emerged, individuals who chose to leave the Ark and inhabit physical bodies once more, began to act as advisors, scientists, and artists throughout the galaxy. They were calm, logical, and deeply empathetic, their half-million-year meditation having cleansed them of the petty grievances and irrational fears that still plagued so many other species. They helped the conclave reevaluate its oldest laws, its most ingrained traditions, showing them where fear had been mistaken for wisdom. A fragile unity was forged, a partnership between the galaxy's ancient guardians and its long-lost children. It was during this period of unprecedented cooperation, as a human archivist and a venerable scholar worked together in the conclave's deepest archives, that the final, universe-altering twist was uncovered. They were analyzing a persistent, low-level cosmic background signal that the conclave had been aware of for millennia, dismissing it as the echo of the universe's creation. But the human, with their advanced pattern recognition algorithms developed in the Ark, saw something else. It was not random noise. There was a deliberate, repeating structure hidden deep within the static, a signal so ancient and so faint that it had gone unnoticed by all. It took their combined intellects, the Venerable's vast historical knowledge and the human's computational power to finally decode it. The result made the revelation of humanity's survival seem like a minor footnote in galactic history. The signal was not a message. It was a timer, an unimaginably ancient countdown, originating not from within their galaxy, but from the silent, terrifying abyss of intergalactic space, and it was nearing its end. The archivist appeared before the conclave one final time. The chamber was the same, but the atmosphere was transformed. The old fears and rivalries were gone, replaced by a shared, sober apprehension. Lyra and Xylo stood side by side, no longer just representatives of their species, but partners in a new, uncertain future. The signal you dismissed as background radiation is a warning beacon. The archivist's voice resonated through their minds, devoid of its usual serenity, now imbued with a chilling urgency. It was placed by a civilization, or a power, so ancient it predates most of the stars in this galaxy. It is counting down to the arrival of what our models can only describe as a galaxy-scale migratory predator. Holographic displays shifted, showing the data. A vast, dark shape, a fleet or an entity the size of a nebula, moving through the void between galaxies at a significant fraction of the speed of light. Its destination, the precise coordinates of their own Milky Way galaxy. Its estimated time of arrival, according to the ancient countdown, less than 100 standard years. The final, terrible truth settled upon them all. The gamma-ray burst that had forced humanity into the Ark had not been a random cosmic event. The Ark's analysis, cross-referenced with the Conclave's deep space observations, showed that the magnetar that produced the burst had been destabilized by the gravitational wake of the approaching entity. The cosmic storm had been nothing more than a ripple spreading ahead of a tidal wave. The silence in the chamber was absolute. The conclave, humanity, all the life in the galaxy, had been living on borrowed time, oblivious to the cosmic threat that had been approaching for millions of years. Their squabbles, their politics, their great Terran mandate, it was all the insignificant drama of children playing in the shadow of a mountain that was about to collapse. Kalen looked at the human archivist, at the calm, resolute intelligence in those silver eyes. He saw the profound, tragic irony of their shared history. The conclave, in its blind fear, had tried to extinguish the chaotic spark of humanity. In doing so, they had inadvertently shielded that spark, placed it in a crucible where it was forged into something far greater than they could have ever conceived. And now that spark, that calm, logical, and deeply powerful consciousness, was their only hope. You knew, Kalen chimed, the thought a quiet, awestruck realization. When you awoke, you knew this was coming. We knew there was a larger context, the archivist replied. Our long sleep was a preparation, not for revenge against you, but for a challenge that would require all of us. The galaxy can no longer afford division. The old fears are a luxury we do not have time for. The archivist's gaze swept across the chamber, meeting the eyes of every being present. The fear of humanity was gone, replaced by a new, far greater fear of the approaching darkness. But for the first time, it was a fear they all shared. They were no longer a collection of disparate, competing species. They were in the Ace of Annihilation won. The long, 500,000-year misunderstanding was over. The conversation had finally begun. And as the great, silent predator slipped through the unending night between galaxies, the combined voices of the Milky Way, led by their once-condemned children, began preparing their reply. The age of the conclave was over. The age of the galaxy had just begun.